March 12th at 1 o'clock, and I will call to order this local government committee meeting. And let's see, the first item is roll call. Mara, if you could help us, please.
Ms. Aldine? Here. Mr. Aguilar?
Here.
Mr. Bass?
Here.
Ms. Faustinos? Ms. Gustafson?
Here.
Ms. Hill?
Here.
Ms. Lane?
Here.
Mr. Rice?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much. I will now go over the remote and in-person meetings for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, go to Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for March 12, 2025. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address the community members directly with your comments, raise your hand by Zoom by raising the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff. Have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used the dial-in numbers to join by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as informational only, we'll hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. For items agendized for action or possible action, we'll hear public comment before the committee takes any action. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. On Zoom, you'll find the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or have sidebar conversations. Please remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I would like to ask remote members to turn on their cameras if they are able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment. You'll be called to the front to speak. To ensure everyone has time to make their desired comment, you can agree with the previous commenter rather than making comments that repeat what others have said. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing a webinar on a personal computer, please ensure your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. If committee members need to ask clarifying questions during the presentations, please do so, but we'll save our deliberation until after the presentation is complete. I'll now look at the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda by staff?
Madam Chair, John Hester, no changes.
Okay, we'll deem the agenda approved as posted. And now we'll move to the minutes. We're on to agenda item number 2, approval of the minutes. I have set the minutes from June 14, 2023 on page 5. Any members of the committee make a change to the minutes? Okay. If folks are happy, may I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So
Motion to approve, Cisco. Or second.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We'll choose Secretary of State Aguilar for this one, and then we'll get you on the next one, Ms. Aldine. With that, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed, please say nay.
Aye.
Okay, I think we are we have a unanimous approval on that. We'll now move into administrative matters. We are now on item 4, administrative matters. 4A, election of the vice chair. If any committee members would like to make a nomination for vice chair of the local government committee, please let me know. And Ms. Lane, are you asking to sign in?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an idea in this regard, and my colleague Supervisor Gustafson, you know, you did a great job being the chair of the governing board, and I know you were feeling a little bit like good riddance when you went off as chair, but you did a great job, and I just thought you would be a natural and a good partner with Chair Hill. If you would accept the nomination as vice chair, I'd be happy to make that.
Well, I'm honored, and of course, I'm willing to serve. So whatever task you all give me, I will accept. Thank you.
So excited.
I know. I just heard her voice.
Uh-huh.
Well, with that being said, then I would be happy to nominate Ms. Gustafson as vice chair.
Okay, and then I have a comment, Ms. Aldine.
Madam Chair, I move to close nominations.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to take any public comment. Is there any public comment in the room on that matter? I'm not seeing any public comment online.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion for Ms. Gustafson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Say nay. And that passes unanimously as well. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to planning matters. We have agenda item 5, which is a presentation, discussion, and possible direction regarding TRPA scenic, historic, and cultural resource protection programs. And this is page 19 of your packet. And Mr. Hester, if you'll help us introduce this item.
Sure. I would like to, if you'll indulge me, set a little context
Please.
for, as you know, at last year's retreat, there were a number of items that got suggested that we just didn't have the capacity to put into the work plan. By working with the chair, identified the 3 that we thought were most important. That's this one that we're hearing today, and plastic bags and bottle ban, and then we'll be hearing about building codes, probably morphing a little bit into how we can harden for wildfire. So today, Jennifer Self, who I'll introduce in a second, I spent a lot of time reaching out to all the local governments, and one of the things that she discovered in doing this was that we have an expert with one of our local governments here in Carson City, Hope Sullivan, who was laughing about that. Hope, you were laughing about being an expert? Uh-oh. Anyway, no, Hope kind of gave, at least me, Jen probably knew it all, but gave me a lesson in what the current state of the art is. And even though they don't have that much that many historic resources in the basin, and that much action occurring in the basin, they have an active historic district in Carson City, which I'm sure some of you know. And so we imposed upon Hope to give us a presentation that's somewhat of an overview of historic preservation. And then following that, her presentation, and she has a few suggestions. Then Jennifer will give you a fuller presentation about the basin, and she has some considerations for you. And so with that introduction, I hope that provides enough context, because I know not all of you have been as intimately involved in it as Jen and I and the chair. So thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll have staff take it away.
Okay, I think I'm next, Hope Sullivan, and somebody has my PowerPoint, so perfect. First, I want to say, I'll introduce myself. I'm Hope Sullivan, Community Development Director in Carson City. I want to thank John and Jen for meeting with me to discuss this topic and for allowing me to participate in today's meeting. My remarks are about 5 minutes long, and after that, I will need to excuse myself to attend a different meeting. For the person who's writing the slides, I'll say next slide when we get there. So we can go to our next slide. So this presentation is about historic preservation, why and how. We're going to start with the why and work our way to the how. So we can go to our next slide. So why do we protect historic resources? Essentially 4 reasons, and this is pretty standard nationally. Because the resource is associated with a significant event in history, it's associated with a significant person in history, it has a distinctive characteristic of period, style, or construction method, or it has yielded or may yield important information about history or prehistory. I'm not in the room, but John is, and Jen is. So I guess show of hands, and John can tell me if anybody raises their hand. Has anyone been to Savannah, Georgia? Anyone raising their hand, John?
Me and Jen.
Good. So I'll ask you two then. When you were in Savannah, what did you notice?
Well, I took a tour and they taught us all about the setup of the city so that they could handle retreat without getting trapped. The squares that created parks.
That's exactly right. So we can go to our next slide. They're called the Oglethorpe Squares. So in 1733, General Oglethorpe came up with this idea to lay out the city in a grid pattern with squares. And the river is on the northern part of what you're looking at on the screen. These squares were originally used as a place for the military to practice their drills. Oglethorpe originally laid out 4 squares near the river, and by 1736, he added 2 more squares. There were 18 additional squares added as the city grew. We can go to our next slide. The squares now serve as a place of beauty and history, with the most recent squares with the most recent squares added in 1856. We can go to the next slide. Carson City has a West Side Historic District, which consists of approximately 246 contributing buildings. The period of significance is 1859 to 1945. We can go to the next slide. Carson City was laid out in 1858 in a grid pattern with a 4-acre public square laid out where the state capitol is now. We can go to the next slide. The city's surviving early houses were constructed west of Carson Street, thus the West Side Historic District. So how does Savannah and Carson City feed into the basin? So now we'll talk about the Tahoe Basin. So we can go to the next slide. In the Tahoe Basin, in my opinion, the dominating features are the lake and the forest. These lend themselves to scenic protection. The built environment should be subordinate to the character defining features of the basin. In the case of Savannah and Carson City, both were man-made resources that yield information about history and distinctive characteristics of the period, if you remember the 4 reasons why we do historic preservation. We can go to our next slide. So that was sort of the why. Why do we do historic preservation? Now, how do we do historic preservation? Next slide. Well, every planner, including TRPA, talks about the toolkit. So we're going to look at the toolkit. The easiest thing is you own the resource. If you want to protect the resource, go buy it and protect it. That's a non-regulatory tool. At the federal level, and I see my tabs got messed up, but that's okay. At the federal level, you have the National Register of Historic Places, and that's an honor, but doesn't ensure protection. The federal government will also require a Section 106 review in cases where a developer is using or a project is using federal money or needs federal permitting. Thank you. As part of the Section 106 review, the applicant will consult with the local agency regarding the impacts on a historic resource and identify potential mitigations to protect the resource. When I talk about the agency that the applicant who has a Section 106 review is working with, that agency is your local government. It's Carson City, it's Douglas County, it's El Dorado County. It's a local government. At the state level in Nevada, and I'll only speak to Nevada because I'm not familiar with California, there is limited opportunity for protection. And in case it wasn't obvious, at the federal level, it's very limited as well. In Nevada, the State Historic Preservation Office manages various grant programs for historic resources. If you accept a grant through the State Historic Preservation Office, a covenant is placed on the property to protect the resource. Any changes or modifications to the resource will require approval from the State Historic Preservation Office. So if you don't obtain a grant, there is no protection at the state level. At the local level, traditionally throughout this country, local government is responsible for land use and land development regulations. This is typically done through zoning. In the case of historic preservation, local government will use either landmarks or historic districts to protect historic resources. Both of these essentially function as an overlay zone on the zoning map. If there's a concentration of resources with similar character defining features, you tend to utilize a district. If it's a standalone resource, you tend to utilize a landmark. You can go to the next slide. The overlay zone tends to include local design standards consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards and with the intent to retain the character defining features of the district or the landmark. This slide is calling out the various elements, or I'll call them elements, that are reviewed in Carson City's district, and it also shows you a map of Carson City's district. And again, we use a district because we have a concentration of resources. So that was a crash course in historic preservation. So where does that leave us? We can go to the next slide. I'll provide my input. In talking to John and Jen, I didn't understand why TRPA would be pursuing historic preservation. I say that as somebody who believes historic preservation is very valuable. I think the character defining features of the basin are the lake and the forest. I think the built environment should be subordinate to these character defining features. I think scenic protection regulations are the appropriate tool given the character defining features of the basin. And I think historic preservation programs should continue to be implemented by local government through zoning. And a local government may choose not to pursue historic preservation, but that's a local decision. And Carson City's made its decisions, other communities will make their decisions, and they'll pursue their local land development regulations as appropriate. This concludes my remarks. I hope I've added value as you discuss this matter. And again, thank you for giving me the time.
What a great presentation. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, for contributing to our discussion and for your passion for Carson City and service.
Thank
Any
you.
questions for her before she runs off to her next meeting on the board? I'm not seeing. No, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And then Ms. Self, it's back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to the chair and the committee for being here with us this afternoon to discuss this topic. As John mentioned, this topic is before the committee because it was requested from you all as a topic that you'd like to know more about. And so as we're going through the presentation today, I just wanted to remind, this is an initial conversation with you all. We do have some considerations at the end of the presentation that we'll go over, but there's no formal action per se being asked of the committee today. Catherine, if you wouldn't mind, there we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. So again, my name's Jen Self, Principal Planner with TRPA. As John also mentioned, this is the presentation and the first of the series. So we'll be back in April and June with the other topics, building codes and plastic bag bans. Today, we're going to focus on our scenic and historic and cultural resource protection programs. If we could go, oh, we're on this slide, so that's good. The Bi-State Compact. Everything that we do here at TRPA really stems back to the compact. And so the statement within our compact, that mandate regarding scenic and historic, really stems back to this one statement on the slide. The preservation, development, utilization, and management of our scenic and natural resources. And historical facilities is wrapped into our scenic protection program. Let's go to the next slide. To address the mandate coming out of the compact, TRPA does have a pretty well-established scenic protection program. It includes standards and policies that aim to reduce the visual impact of the built environment on the natural landscape. And the attainment towards our scenic goals happens with the implementation of our code of ordinances and building to standards that are in both the TRPA design review guidelines and then also the local area plans. Let's go to the next slide. So just last month in February, TRPA released the 2023 threshold evaluation. And as you all heard and our APC heard today, the attainment of our scenic standards, admittedly perhaps slow, is steady and is improving. And the overall appearance of our natural landscape has improved. But we also recognize there's noticeable challenges to making sure that we continue that attainment. And we're going to talk more about that today. We tend to measure progress through 10 adopted scenic resource standards, and the scenic program tracks attainment for specific sites, for example, a public recreation beach, or a prominent natural feature. So a view of Mount Talac from public roadways and things like that. We also measure scenic attainment through 33 shoreline units and 54 roadway units. So the map on the right of the screen is showing the scenic roadway units around the basin. And we have 3 different categories of these roadway units. There's natural, transitional, and urban. The thicker lines shown on the screen, so for example, around Emerald Bay, that's a natural corridor where the natural landscape should be the dominant feature. There's a void of buildings, or if there are buildings, they're far set back from the road. And that's much different from our urban corridors. So the skinniest of lines that you see on the map on the screen, those are our urban corridors, where it's recognized that the built environment is the dominant feature. But things like vegetation screening, building design, articulation, things like that are supposed to make that built environment at least harmonize with the natural landscape. Let's go to the next slide. When we evaluate the scenic quality, we're looking at two things: the quality of the experience passing through the environment and the quality of the resources viewed in that unit. And we have the data like the comparative photos shown on the screen, and then also scoring going back to the 1980s to show the change over time. Let's go to the next slide. Within the context of our scenic program, it is important to recognize that we're essentially talking about the long game. Incrementally, with each and every public and private investment in Tahoe, properties and entire corridors or streets are brought up to monitored standards. So this is a photo showing the Highway 50 corridor on the South Shore, looking towards the casino. And if we can go to the next slide. This is roughly that same area today. So showing the improvements with modern standards for pedestrian walkways, setbacks, colors, materials, building design, articulation, landscaping. This is essentially our building design standards being implemented in that play. Today, most redevelopment happening within our urban corridors is reviewed by the local jurisdictions under the MOUs. So it's really incumbent upon them to review redevelopment and projects to make sure they're in keeping with those local area plans and the design standards. Let's go to the next slide. And then in addition to the private development, scenic attainment is also comes through our other regional plan programs such as the EIP and land bank coordination and water quality protection. So the photos on the screen are showing the wildwood basins also in South Shore, and these basins serve as area-wide stormwater treatment, but then also scenic upgrades along this corridor and open space. Next slide. The most stringent of our scenic development standards are for projects occurring along the shoreline of Lake Tahoe. And when we talk about shoreline protection, it's actually the view from the water looking landward. And again, trying to minimize the visual impact of the built environment on the landscape. Next slide. For projects that are visible from the shoreline, these are required to go a fairly rigorous scenic analysis. So just an example of what that may look like is up on the screen. This places an objective scoring system on materials, texture, color, reflectivity, visual mass, and then also screening of the structure. And while this system is, it definitely has a steep learning curve, but most applicants and consultants actually commend this program because it gives them some predictability as to meeting our scenic standards. So as long as they can propose different elements of the building design, change articulation, change reflectivity, change materials on that structure that are in keeping with our design codes and score out, for the most part, the project can be approvable. So it does offer some predictability. Let's go to the next slide. So with the scenic program, what's working well, and then some of the ongoing challenges. As far as working well in the threshold evaluation, we reported that 96% of our scenic resource standards are being maintained or have shown an improvement since adoption. So these scores are suggesting that our capital improvement projects, our ordinances, and our building design standards have improved the scenic conditions. Again, over time, we're talking about decades. Also, as mentioned, the existing program has some flexibility to cater towards different circumstances. So for example, our local communities can adopt even more strict design standards or architectural aesthetics within their local area plans, as long as it's in keeping with the regional plan. And then we definitely recognize that there's challenges to maintain the scenic threshold attainments over time. So in the scenic evaluation or in the threshold evaluation, we did note that unauthorized roadside parking along our recreation areas does threaten some of these ratings. So for example, Emerald Bay and State Route 28, some of those recreation corridors. But it's important to note that a lot of concerted effort that you all have been involved in as well with our corridor management plans really aim to address that, that concern. Let's go to the next slide. Other challenges with our scenic program are just making sure that we continue on attainment. This was actually brought up a little bit in APC today, and I think it was mentioned at the governing board with the conversation with threshold evaluation, is making sure our design review guidelines and standards are in keeping with wildfire best practices and home hardening. So making sure, for example, our outdated design review guidelines encourage wooden fences. And so are those standards still applicable to the best practices today for wildfire? There's also some questions or some just challenges as far as reviewing projects that are in more of the modern mountain aesthetic and architectural style as shown on the screen. Other concerns regarding scenic involve larger homes being built, so larger in scale and mass. This particular issue is being discussed as part of our Cultivating Communities initiative. And then there's also some concerns about the temporary perceived objects and signs and things like that can degrade scenic quality. So for example, in occupied buildings or feather flag signs that tend to kind of clutter up those roadways. Kind of overall, in talking with our partners leading up to this discussion, folks generally agree that our scenic program is working. There are some concerns and challenges, but for the most part, folks felt like some of those concerns could be addressed through existing work plan priorities, such as the corridor management plan, such as continued training with our MOU partners and things like that. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Now I'm going to talk about the Historic Resource Protection Program. Again, as far as our compact goes and our regional plan, it's under the same umbrella, but it's slightly different. So the compact includes the mention of historical facilities within the context of scenic qualities. Hope pointed this out a little bit, but a historic resource, when we're referring to that, it could be a site or a specific building or an entire district, a collection of resources. The regional plan and code includes management strategies for the protection of historic resources, as well as required tribal consultation for specific sites. Other regulations that protect historic and cultural resources that are at play in the basin that you're probably well aware of is NEPA and CEQA compliance. And then there's also local regulations and guidelines in county master and general plans, as well as TRPAs. TRPA first began to identify significant regional landmarks starting back in 1971. We partnered with the Forest Service and came up with an inventory or map of those true regionally significant landmarks all across the basin. The map on the right of the screen just shows an example of that inventory dating back to that time period. And we actually adopted that inventory into our regional plan. So as part of the ordinance of the regional plan for those landmarks. Let's go to the next slide. And this directive that we have to identify and try to preserve historic resources, we had that initial inventory of landmarks back in the 70s and 80s. And then today we continue to identify potentially historic resources on a parcel to parcel basis. So back in the day in the 70s, when we were identifying regionally significant landmarks, we are talking about the Thunderbird Lodge and the Camp Rich and those true regionally significant places. However, today, the benchmark that we have is to require a determination for any property that's over 50 years of age. So when it comes to the Tahoe Basin, that's actually almost exactly half of the parcels today were built in 1975 and older. And so as this timeline has shifted, where our determinations in the past were starting to collect truly significant resources, today most of our determinations are for the properties that you see on the screen. They're really standard summer Tahoe homes that were built in the 60s and 70s. Catherine, would you mind showing the map? So this is a map our GIS team put together. It just shows the proliferation where we see just a small amount of development in the 1940s, And if we can hit play, this is going to go through the timeline of Tahoe history. And then all of a sudden, when we get to the 1960s and 70s, there is just an absolute explosion of development in Tahoe. And as you all are probably aware, this is coming out of the 1960s Olympics that happened in now Palisades up in North Shore. It is really during the 60s and 70s that this huge proliferation of development occurred in Tahoe. So now, because we have this 50-year benchmark, staff and applicants are really starting to be bombarded with these determinations. And you may be wondering why 50 years? I'm almost 50. Is 50, does that mean you're historic? And I like to say, just because it's old doesn't mean it's historic. The 50-year rule actually comes from the National Park Service as the benchmark that's used nationwide. And the Park Service came up with that in 1948, essentially saying that they weren't going to nominate a resource as historic that was less than 50 years of age. So that became sort of a national standard. At 50 years, that's when we do an evaluation. And that's what we've adopted as an agency. Most of the determinations, you can go back to the slide, thank you. Most of the determinations we do today result in determination of non-historic. Last year, we did about 161 of these. This equates to 325 hours of staff time. So not insignificant. It is taking staff resources to do this. And it's also delaying the process for applicants. So because TRPA has this process, these standards, for any MOU partner, if they receive an application that they would otherwise review under their MOU, they're actually saying, oh, nope, pause, TRPA has this process, you need to go talk to them. The application is put on hold until they complete this determination process. And again, most of these are resulting in non-historic. Once in a blue moon, something will be recognized as historic. For example, there is a property down by Edgewood. It was a private property, but it was built by Julia Morgan, a renowned architect, and it wasn't on our radar in the past, and it came in and was deemed historic. But again, most of those are non-historic. Let's go to the next slide. This is another historic property that we worked with a private property owner a few years ago on the West Shore. Just talking about the process a little bit. So we have the determination and then, well, what happens after that? The historic determination itself does not place a moratorium, so to speak, on what can be done on private property. As Hope talked about, there's very limited protections actually, even at the federal and state level to protect historic properties. And that's the case here in Tahoe. But for us, it does change the process. So if a property is deemed historic, it is required to go to a hearings officer, and we require mitigation, which is typically recordation of the property. For the most part, folks are proposing to demolish resources or to do significant changes. So those are the proposed projects that we're seeing. This was a rare example. The Schilling Estate, where in 2015, Mr. Mozart is actually donating this resource. It was dismantled, stored down, I believe in Carson, and it's being donated to the Tahoe cross country. It's going to be turned into a ski lodge. So that's a rare example of a resource actually being rehabilitated. That's what we would like to see, but it's pretty rare.
But it was dismantled first?
Yes.
It was completely taken down, stored in Carson, and it's being brought back and rebuilt?
That is the plan. So it's been dismantled, and I believe it's still in storage, and they're in the process now of trying to acquire capital funding to rebuild it. And Catherine, if you could actually go back to the previous slide. So it's important to point out, we talked about the determination project and the project review that's happening at TRPA. Again, this is happening at TRPA and it's not happening in the local community. I have a background in historic preservation, And this was odd to me as well when I came to Tahoe in 2015. Typically, historic preservation is happening at the local community level. And so here I am seeing a disconnect. For the most part, when we have a hearings officer review of proposed projects, those are garnering pretty little or no attention from the community. And then again, these determinations are happening with us versus with the local jurisdiction. So in conversations with the local partners we had leading up to this, we are also finding that our processes were actually also largely duplicative of what's in the county and general plans. So for example, with El Dorado County and Placer County, there's actually a pretty robust guidelines and standards for historic resource protection within their county plan. Placer and El Dorado both have a working relationship with their museums department where they will do determinations and project reviews if it's outside of the TRPA process. But if it's a TRPA review, they send them to us. And then also in Washoe and Douglas County, they have existing inventories that they rely on from the State Historic Preservation Office. And then there is also comprehensive surveys that were done in the 1990s and 2000s on the Nevada portion that are referenced. So there's definitely duplicative kind of procedures happening in the basin around historic resource protection. Catherine, if you could actually skip ahead 2 slides. One more. Thank you. So we have just 2 more slides and we'll turn it back over to you all for discussion. We wanted to kind of summarize some of our findings leading up to this conversation with you all. In the staff report, I think these were labeled as recommendations, but again, no official action, but these are just some of our findings and considerations. As far as the historic and cultural resource protection program goes, I think it is ripe for some improvements. There is the possibility to defer to local jurisdictions for the identification and project review of locally significant resources, where perhaps TRPA remains engaged in the regionally historic landmarks, and something to that effect. What that could look like, potentially amendments to our code, but again, that's up for discussion and direction from all of you. We heard from a number of folks that it would be very helpful to have improved coordination between permitting staff. So for example, talking with El Dorado County staff, there are some resources that they had identified that weren't really on our radar and some resources we had identified that weren't on their radar. So better coordination on where these are would be really helpful. And then of course, continuing to work with all of our partners to support the Washoe Tribe liaison. That's a new position to build capacity so they can be more engaged. So that's with the historic protection program. And let's go back. Sorry, Catherine, I'm making you jump around a little bit. So with the scenic protection program, I mentioned this a little bit in the slide already. But for the most part, folks thought that the scenic protection program was quote unquote working. There are some challenges, but they felt that the existing work plan priorities, such as implementation of our corridor plans, MOU trainings that we're doing, the cultivating communities initiative, some of those concerns may be addressed through some of those. So we do want to continue regular trainings with MOU partners. But for the most part, we think that the scenic program is working. There is an opportunity to look at our design standards to make sure they're up to snuff with best practices for wildfire preparedness. A board member during the evaluation conversation last month mentioned potentially wanting to see an inventory of projects that are awaiting capital investments. So for example, just being more aware of properties that are potentially underutilized or abandoned around the region. And then one potential improvement is to review our allowances for screening on shoreline projects. So there's a few photos in the slide where right now our scenic scoring system you can rely somewhat heavily on vegetation screening. And then a challenge comes up if that vegetation screening isn't viable. What happens? It becomes this negotiation between a project proponent and our compliance staff of how to properly mitigate that project. So those are just a few thoughts on our end. I'm going to wrap up my portion and turn it back over to you.
Great work. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'll open it up to board members in the room and then open it to board members online, and then we'll take public comment. Ms. Eldine.
Thank you, Jen, for the presentation. I would argue that historic resources can also be scenic resources. People go out on Lake Tahoe, they spend a lot of time looking at some of these magnificent homes that are built within view. I mean, many of them are shielded, obviously, in accordance with our rules and regulations. But I think that I understand the desire to simplify the process, to rely more heavily on local jurisdictions to the extent that they have the capacity to deal with historic landmarks or structures that have some sort of locally have a historic importance of some sort. I'm not opposed to what you're proposing as recommendations, but I want to, when we developed Glenbrook, we promised the Bliss family that we would adaptively reuse 3 buildings, the Jellerson House, Glenbrook Inn, and the Lakeshore House. All were built, in the early the inn was built in the early 1900s when the Bliss family transferred its assets from Tahoe City or from Glenbrook to Tahoe City. They built the Tahoe Tavern, which unfortunately was demolished. Hindsight is always 20/20. And so they basically focused most of their attention on the Tahoe City area. Then they came back to Glenbrook in 1906 and built the Glenbrook Inn when the mills, became unproductive. And so the Glenbrook Inn was built in 1906. The Lakeshore House and the Jellerson House were both built in the 1800s. And we were able to adaptively reuse those buildings. And I will say, if you are in Glenbrook Bay, I mean, that's what people see. They see this, this historic setting with 3 historic rehabilitated buildings. And that brings a lot of joy to people. I mean, historic preservation, I think, has huge implications to us as a society in terms of respecting our ancestors and our predecessors and the people who came before us, who made a difference in our communities. So I'm a big advocate for preservation. I understand it can be expensive, and I certainly also respect, private property rights. But to bring this into focus, there were 2 estates on the west shore of Lake Tahoe, the Brushwood Estate and the Carousel Estate. I believe both of them were demolished by Mark Zuckerberg with the blessing of this agency. And that really, I understand the Carousel. The reasoning was the Carousel Estate, which was a beautiful home that was combined. There were 3 different buildings that were combined over time to form a larger structure. The Brushwood Estate actually had historical significance. In fact, in the fact sheet that was prepared when the site was being made available for sale, says the rich history of the estate dates back to the early 1920s when Stuart Edward White, a famed American author and conservationist, purchased the land. He was a close friend of Theodore Roosevelt, who called White, quote, the kind of young American who is making our new literature, end of quote. White was included with the likes of Jack London and Rex Beach. White built 3 years on the property, built 3 yurts on the property with wood floors and canvas walls, and used the site as a retreat to write the summer months. He named the property the Brushwood Estate after the book The Brushwood Boys by fellow author Rudyard Kipling, a tale of adventure which he found to have a certain romantic connotation appropriate for the setting. So, I mean, it did have historic significance and it was torn down. Now, maybe we didn't want to go toe-to-toe with Mark Zuckerberg, very wealthy guy, has a lot of legal resources at his disposal. But, I mean, these are 2 beautiful buildings that are now gone and can never be resurrected. So I think TRPA does have a role to play in these evaluations. Why we gave permission to Mr. Zuckerberg to tear both buildings down, I don't know. I'm not condemning anyone, but I see these buildings, from the past being, raised, I have to think that we have lost a lot of important opportunities to preserve our history. I have no problem with adjusting, you know, the year. I think 50 years, as you point out, Jen, is you know, has become probably an obsolete criteria. But my concern is if local jurisdictions aren't interested in historic preservation and we have a mandate in our compact, you know, to give consideration to historic resources as part of our mission, then I think we have to make sure that we are going to abide by, you know, our duty in that respect. I appreciated Hope Sullivan's presentation. We built a 3-story Victorian just outside the historic district to be in keeping with the architectural tradition of the historic district. And I have to say that, you know, tours through our historic district are a tourist attraction. We have, you know, we used to have a blue line that took people through the historic district. There are plaques that have been mounted in front of each building. You can, there's a recorded kind of recitation of the historical importance of these buildings and what part they played in the history of the community. And so as you can imagine, I'm kind of passionate about this because I think that, you know, to the extent we can intervene and assist in helping owners of these properties to realize that, you know, it's not only a house they live in or a building they occupy, but it's something that emotionally belongs to more than just them. And, you know, if we can encourage them to, you know, give thoughtful consideration to how that asset could be protected, I think we need to do that. And I think to the extent we can, I know that there is a pretty active historic society in Tahoe City. And I think that we should add those historic societies as meaningful partners in our attempt to preserve these buildings and to identify these assets. And I mean, even in Carson City, we have a historic district, but one of the historic homes in the district, it's not occupied. This is the problem. A lot of people buy these properties, they let them sit and they start falling into disrepair. And I don't think, frankly, Carson City has enough tools in its toolbox to keep that from happening. And we should have the ability to go in and make minor repairs and charge the property owner by assessing them through their property taxes. Because this is a history that belongs to all of us. And I think it needs to be protected. So I got frustrated. People were coming to me for some reason and saying, is there something we can do? Because one of the windows in the upper story had fallen in, you know, and they were concerned about what might happen to the building. And so I got on the phone and called the owner. I said, look, you know, you own a building that's historically important in our historic district. And there are people who want to see it properly protected. And actually she was, even though she lives outside of the area, she was very appreciative of the fact that I called and she was able to contact someone and the window was repaired. So, you know, it takes a community to really make this happen. It's not just the regulatory agencies at the local or regional level that have a role to play. And I don't know how we galvanize people. I don't know how we energize them, you know, to be more engaged. But I think to the extent we can make that happen, the better. So that's my little diatribe.
Well, I'm deputizing you to be our next code enforcement officer because we need more help out in the field. I'll tell you that at the other governments that I'm on boards of, and to really look about how to support these assets. So I appreciate that. Ms. Lane.
Yeah, my comment was going to be drop the mic. You know, everything you said was just spot on. And the cool thing about today's presentation was the little step back in time and to see some of the really courageous improvements that we've made, you know, specifically in the city of South Lake Tahoe. But it was fun to kind of see the way it was and the way it is today. And so we're doing so many things right, but I share that concern. I share the concern about asking local government to be the jurisdiction to kind of handle this. We get a lot of mandates through the state of California and federal government. They tell you what to do, but they don't give you the resources to do it. And my concern would be that we continue to make these bad or questionable decisions about what's historic and what's not. I know also on the West Shore up in Meeks Bay, there were 2 old cabins that were just completely leveled and new infrastructure being built in its place without any attempt to preserve the wood or, to recycle it. There was like, it was just gone. And so these are all considerations that we need to make. And I don't know if we have the talent, time, money, expertise at the local level to do this. I think I love your idea of the historical groups. It really has to be a program that somebody can take and say, okay, I can implement this. But I don't know that we have the wherewithal at the local level to implement something without that. I also wanted to just note that you have here that if you created some of these databases, that they would not, exact location and cultural archaeological resources would not be accessible to the public. I'm really strongly in favor of that. There are some Indian burial sites, for example, that I think people, if they knew where they were, that they would go do significant damage to them. So I do think we need to identify them, but to the degree that we can protect them from the public being more interested in them than they should, we need to do that. So great presentation, Jen, and look forward to hearing from our other colleagues.
Okay, I'll just go through the line here. Ms. Gustafson?
I was afraid you were going to do that since Mr. Zuckerberg's properties are in my district. I'm very familiar with the Shilling Lodge and what it took and the cost of trying to preserve that building because I've been working hand in hand with the Tahoe Cross Country Ski Education Association who took it over. There's huge value in that. I'm not sure what the difference was between that and those requirements and the examples that Ms. Aldine brought up with brushwood and carousel. Jen, do you have any insights on that?
I can certainly speak to that. Jen Self again for the record. The Shilling Estate was preserved for rehabilitation. That's the ideal. That's what we would love to see, either preserved in situ and site or to be reused in an appropriate manner by the community.
But Jen, my question wasn't that a requirement that TRPA placed on it?
That was not a requirement under the TRPA Code of Ordinances.
Okay.
Yeah, at the federal level, state level, and under the regional plan, there's very little teeth, so to speak, and requirements that you have to preserve a historic resource. So it does change the process of how something is approved, but there's no hard stop.
Okay. So that probably explains it. I thought it was a TRPA requirement because the extraordinary effort that went into that and has gone into that, continuing to store that property, inventory every single piece of wood, every nail that came out of it in order to relocate it so that a structure could be built there. That was removed and a new structure could be built there. I agree that some of these properties need to be identified. If we find that they are noteworthy, and it sounds like Shelley's done her research as she always does, and can present that. I also know of other properties. I mean, as you have stated, and you are not historic, but I certainly am. And so once you're over 50, right? But there certainly are way too many properties for us to be looking at everything over 50 years old in residential back streets in our communities that, really have no history. So I agree with that's a somewhat obsolete age, and I'd rather see us look at identifying and doing that kind of overall plan, identifying those properties that we find to be historically valid and working all of our energy on those most focused ones and not on, what I feel would be an incredible waste of time and energy to go through hundreds, if not thousands of these as they come in for remodel permits or reinvestment. I know many of our buildings in Tahoe City, we face the same thing, and commercial buildings aren't being touched. Um, and it's very challenging. Like if you look at the old fire station in Tahoe City or the community center, both have historic designation. I mean, they're over 50 years old. The one has a historic designation, but as I understand it, can either be relocated or interpreted in place and removed. So, they're not functional buildings. They weren't built to today's standards, and our own building and safety codes get in the way of these areas of preserving all of them. So, which are the most critical to our to interpreting our past, but making room for our future? And it's a real balancing act. So I definitely agree with the 50 years is not the right measurement. And I guess I'd rather look at what it would take to do more of a survey of all the properties remaining and identify those that we want to focus on as a versus evaluating all of these. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hester, you had something.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Hester for the record. I live in a National Historic District and there are no protections. Even if my neighbors think my house is great, which some of them do, I can tear it down. And if the city says it's historic, sends it to the State Historic Preservation Office, they'll say, take some pictures and put them on file. And that's about it. The only house in our district that I know of that has restrictions is the National Historic Landmark House on the bluff overlooking the Truckee River, the Guston's home. And that has to be done by the owner. The owner has to agree to do that.
Ms. Aldine, and then we'll go to Mr. Rice.
John, with respect to that, the Lakeshore House in Glenbrook, we put on the National Register. And you're right. It is cumbersome. We had to hire a preservation expert just to get rid of the weighted windows. They had the old weights, and put in storm windows, that would make the building habitable and more comfortable to occupy. But we also, as a result of it being on the register, and maybe we can encourage people who own truly significant, historic structures to apply, and maybe we can have our historic societies help with the application process, because as a result of that, you can apply to have the property assessed as though it was open space. So there is a tax advantage to putting it on the register. Now, what happens is if you tear it down, you have to repay, in other words, the abatement that you receive, but that still would discourage people, I think, in some cases from doing that. So maybe that's the route we should take, is we should encourage them, if it's a really significant structure, to make an application to put it on the National Register, have them apply for a tax abatement, and that would at least provide a bit of a deterrent to having it demolished in the future. Just a thought.
Thank you. And Mr. Rice, did you have anything?
Yeah, just to throw my 2 cents in, old is not necessarily historic. The house that I live in is over 50 years old, and we have done all kinds of things to it to make it updated, like replacing the furnaces and the windows and the sliders. And I would hate to think that we would have to get some sort of special permission to maintain our home. So I think that the 50-year boundary is stretching it a little bit far. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Secretary of State Aguilar? Nope. Okay, Mr. Bass.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the presentation was great. I I very much agree with a lot that Ms. Aldine stated, definitely the significance, and I think that it is our role to preserve these historic properties without a doubt. I will say though too that the 50-year mark, for South Lake Tahoe, that's about 66% of the buildings and homes in South Lake Tahoe that are over 50 years old. And that does create definitely delays in development and, makes it more difficult. And so I think that there's got to be some way to streamline some of that process. And I don't know that it's the local government fully taking over that like approval of what is historic, but maybe there's a way for the local development departments to kind of deem what would be historic, and maybe it's like we move it from 50 to 75, and then everything after 75 years is automatically triggered. But to me, I think that looking at a streamlined approach for some of these, and then I would also say that like there's, I think, very identifiable properties that are obviously historical. Maybe some of them already have been made, you know, I would imagine, but there's ones, Fleur de Lac comes to mind, or different ones that have such historical significance that I think should just be identified and put on a roll basically right away. But yeah, I think streamlining it, I know my staff would be very supportive of that for development services in the city of South Lake Tahoe.
Thank you. Well, I think I hear consensus about an inventory. If there's a partnership that all the local governments can do to work with you on that we don't love the 50-year idea. And that TRPA has a role. I think there's a little bit of difference of opinion of what that role should be. I mean, I would like to streamline the process and not do the hearing officer situation if we can, on single family homes and commercial properties that need to be redeveloped when our major mission is the environment, and typically redevelopment helps the environment, and having old buildings doesn't necessarily help with the environment. And I find in Reno, folks use the historical resource as an excuse to not allow for housing that they don't want to see in their neighborhoods, and I don't like that either. John and I have experienced this in our the part of Reno that we live in. And then I know that Incline Village and Crystal Bay, they have a business group that is working on recommendations to the for the Tahoe area plan for Washoe County to help with sign issues, because they also see the clutter of all these different things on the roadway. We don't have enough code enforcement, although we're going to talk to you about it. Yeah, Shelley, we're going to get you a badge, Shelley. Just kidding. And working together to see how they can help businesses have bigger signs, but less clutter. And I think that's something we're working on to see how we can help with that. And using the community to our benefit. So I'm sure that there's ways that local government can do that as well. Any other comments on the board? Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Shelley Aldine for the record. I think I would like to see, along with the inventory of potentially historic properties, I'd like to see, using our new criteria of 75 years or older, I'd also like to see an inventory of the historic societies or people who are in the business of recording Tahoe history, because I think those are the people we need to mobilize. They're already impassioned, and I think they would be delighted to be given a new role in helping the agency and local governments identify these buildings and work with the property owners, in any way they can to ensure that those buildings remain standing.
Great. Anything else, Ms. Lane? Nothing? Okay, any other board members have comments before I open it up to public comment? I'm not seeing that anyone does. Great. We'll now go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the local government committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now in person or clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or dialing *9 on your phone. You will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Looking for folks in the room. I'm not seeing any. And then anyone online.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment.
Okay. Any other comments for the committee? And
If I
yes.
may, can I
Mhm.
summarize what I think we're hearing?
Yes, we'd love
Uh,
it.
Okay. You would like inventories of the properties and the historical interest groups, for lack of a better term. We'll talk with our local government partners about maybe this is an aspect that some of them want to put into their
Mhm.
MOUs and some of them don't.
Mhm.
And then the other part is look at changing the 50-year to some other longer,
Appropriate.
like
yeah.
75 or
Mhm.
something.
Great. Any disputes with that summary from the board?
Madam Chair, I wanted
Yes.
to, Wes had brought up some of the complications associated with having historic property. Generally, they're not concerned about anything that's interior to the building. In other words, you don't
Ah.
have to, you don't have to have, things that are not compliant with code, like, the rise of the stair, that sort of thing. You can change out your water heaters. I mean, you don't have to really run down to the local stream and bring buckets into your house to heat the water on the stove. It's just things that are external that can be seen.
That's a good note. Ms. Lane.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. Our family business, Lane Photography, was hired back in the early 2000s by the US Forest Service to photograph the interior of the Valhalla, that's
Mm.
now the theater. And we had to photograph it in such a way that it showed pitch. It showed, different angles. We had to do it in such a way that if the theater no longer was to be the theater, it could be completely restored based on the photographs that we provided. And I'm sure there was somebody in there that documented how many wood boards and things like that. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Little sidebar. I don't know where it fits, but I felt like I wanted to share it.
That's cool. I didn't know you were a photographer. I love that. Okay, do we need a motion on this?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think just that summary, it's up to you if you all wanted to do a formal motion, but I think staff, Jenny, we have some direction or some basically informal guidance from the committee.
I would agree with that. Yeah, today was really a discussion and to get guidance and input from all of you. And we can certainly come back with some of the items that we listed with some proposed alternatives at that point.
Thank you. Wonderful. All right, with that, we'll close our one action item of the day and we'll move into our public interest comments. This is the final matter of business. It's our general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the local government committee on an item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. The local government committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action or discussing issues raised by the public during this public comment period. Finally, comments must relate to matters within the jurisdiction of the agency. If any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by the TRPA staff member. And looking for folks in the room. Any final public comments? Not seeing any. And any online?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I will close public comment. Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Ms. Aldine. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All
Aye.
right. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for a great meeting, everyone.